The Fly, Chapter 8. The Fly and the Birth of Comets. March 20, 1842. For you to understand the following important matter thoroughly, it will be necessary to review that which has already been told. That is, only the positive polarity part of our fly, since that is the part which is the collection point of life. Take a close look at the sun. Which of you can make a good estimate of how far its most distant rays reach? It will certainly not be an insignificant distance. If you put the sun's age at over 100,000 decillion years, the unthinkably long time during which it has been sending its rays into the endless spaces, and the original rays, are still on their rapid journey into the vast endlessness, while countless more rays have been reflected and returned, you will more firmly and fundamentally understand what has already been said about the collection points of life. As the sunshine cries out to you daily, "See, I have sent my rays into endless space all this time, and still my light is no weaker for you than it was endlessly long times before." But here you will easily ask, how then will the sun get those rays back, which are still in the process of going out into the endless distances of space? Rays from the first evolutionary period of the sun. And I say to you that this doesn't hurt anything, for if the rays would still proceed a decillion times further than they already have, they would still encounter a point which would impede their progress and cause them to return. But, you might say, how does the sunlight get replaced after the long journey of relatively few stopping points? The returning light must be, at most, very sparse. But this also does not hurt anything. The sun receives back its own rays only very sparsely. It is, on the other hand, also a collection point, and as such takes up rays from more than 1,000,000 other suns, intensifies these, and then radiates them out again in large quantities. Now, if you consider this a little, you will very easily find at your fingertips how light, formed by me from endlessness to endlessness, is managed and arranged, and in this way not even the smallest atom floats without purpose in the infinite ether of endlessness. For the spirit unaccustomed to thinking of great things, such a concept is difficult to grasp. But a creative example which I want to include here for you will surely serve your spirit well in understanding the return and economical exchange of rays. And now, understand. Wherever the rays of two suns meet in the, for your comprehension, plainly very wide in-between spaces, there they themselves eventually turn into a mutual reception point. Already you ask, how then, and in what way? This question is really very easy to understand and answer, as you surely have to accept that the outgoing ray, which is contained in time and space, even though it is undeniably subtle, is certainly something material nevertheless. When such rays of two suns meet, they are naturally, as rays of a sun, of the same polarity. But you know that things of like polarity never attract, but always repel one another. Now, if you possess just a little bit of good understanding in your heart, you must be able to grasp, as already stated, that when such rays meet, they repel each other and, as you tend to say, send each other home. But what happens when the rays of several suns must necessarily, and in a quite natural way, meet each other in a place which is equally distant from all these suns, and the rays meet each other from all possible directions? Now that is a slightly different question. But in order not to keep you from the main point for too long, I will tell you now that which you would have learned through diligent thought. That at this spot, a conflict builds up between rays, because some of the rays cut right through some of the other rays and meet there, which transversing of the rays you must view as if you laid several crosses upon one another, so that a number of rays running out from a middle point would be visible. These traversing rays necessarily neutralize the polarity, and by that they hinder other rays, which run into the diagonal, from immediately making their return trip. Accordingly, in time, there develops a ball of rays, or better for your understanding, a shimmering ball of light, which, with time, develops a kind of mist-fine thickness, and so becomes heavier and heavier. Now, since suns, like the planets, move around other central suns, it depends which sun, rotating along its wide path, comes close to this ball of light, with the consequence that it then quite naturally draws this ball into its sphere and thus consumes it. Now that you know this, I tell you that this is the proper, most true formation of comets. But I already perceive another question in your mind, which is, yes, but how come such comets survive and aren't consumed by these suns which attracted them? You could, indeed, deduce the answer from that which has already been said previously. But in order to save you from so much thinking, I will tell you that the reason lies in the already mentioned neutralization of the rays. By that neutralizing, or, for your better comprehension, relaxation, the assembled rays become negative in polarity, and so form in relationship to the sun a point of opposite polarity, which then, in accordance with the eternal order, has the lasting capacity, upon encounter, to take in the positive polarity sun rays, to relax them, and to use them for its own nourishment. That a comet does this is made evident by the wide circle of vapour surrounding it, which is usually on the opposite side of the sun and stretches out in a so-called tail. But what is this tail actually? Understand, this tail is really nothing but a delaying of the sun rays, which, in their initial ejection from the sun, are slowed down by the negative polarity, and in their return to their attracting body, appear as an extremely frail mass of vapour. Now, by this, the sun has acquired another border, which will feed on quite a few rays until it reaches a planetary consistency. Once it has reached this degree of density, it then, necessitated by its own central weight, returns the sun its rays countless many times, without jeopardizing its own being. With its planetary status, it not only takes up the rays of the sun in its vicinity, but also sucks up masses of rays of countless other suns which surround it, and then, in a way, directs them to its mother. Now we know this, but within you stirs a question, and you ask, yes, but what does our little fly have to do with the development of comets and reflections of the rays of suns? But here I tell you, just a little patience, and we will let them buzz behind the great roar of a newly created world. But before we can do this, we must take a look at the sun's rays themselves, and see what these imponderable light particles streaming out of the sun actually are in and by themselves. You already know part of this, but a little repetition will not hurt our subject, and so hear them. These outgoing light atoms are, as you know, also the first step and the origin of the little light animals I told you about before. Now the collection of such ray atoms for a later developing planet cluster are, at the same time, also collections of animal life, namely in such a planet cluster. But how does animal life express itself upon such a new planet? The animal life expresses itself of necessity in a twofold way, and, indeed, first in a negative life, which is the plant life there. Once this life has received the proper saturation and is no longer able to take into itself all the polar life present, then there naturally and of a necessity develops a positive polar life, and, because of oversaturation of the negative life, it then has a sufficient supply of nourishment for itself. But in what form does positive pole life first express itself? Just get a microscope and look at either a drop of water mixed with some rotting, decayed plants, or observe the extracted plant juice, and to your great amazement, you will see hordes of tiny animals. Through this explanation, and with very little effort, it will become clear to you how the negative life pole reverses itself and goes over into the positive polarity of life. Understand, my dear little ones, as the animal life begins to develop, it can no longer go into stagnation, but gradually begins its return to the original center of all life. Since following the eternal order of progression is observed everywhere, which, in and by itself, is nothing but an always more complete and greater solidification of life, this also quite naturally happens with the returning rays, which also always become more intensive the more they approach their original point of exit. It is obvious that life cannot return to its origin in this chaotic state, but it collects itself in ever denser forms, and thus returns to its eternal source. But what is then the next step wherein this first positive polar life consolidates itself? Now, my dear ones, let our fly come forth. See, this is the first animal to populate the newly formed planet. For, as you know, even today, this animal takes in such nourishment from which a trillion-fold life becomes one life. And now you will understand why I said earlier, just a little patience, and we will soon hear our fly buzzing behind the mighty roar of our new planet clump. Thus you will also understand the higher consolidation, how the fly comes to be a collection point of life. And in addition, I tell you that, viewed in this light, as a collection point of life, a single fly counts for more than our entire formally developed planet clump. And when you think about this, you will see how much higher above the outer matter life itself is, even in its first spark. And you will also see how much higher over all suns and all the planets stands the life of a single person. And when you comprehend this, it will not be hard for you to understand why I, as the original life of all life, as Father and Redeemer, came to earth and have made man into a child of mine, and have prepared for him a way to my heart. And finally, you will comprehend why I said to you, the fly, it sings to you of victory. The victory is not complete yet, but the following, as well as further information, will let you clearly see how much of the victory is already present. And let us leave it at that again for today.